Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings NBA picks for Monday, December 28th. We got a pretty full slate. I think there's 11 games on tap tonight. A bunch of them have spreads that are over 200, but we also have a lot of games that are like 8 to 15 point spreads, which is probably not something that we want to be targeting too much. Remember, it's okay to target some of the teams that are the favorites in this situation, because those teams are still probably going to put up some points, but these are not great games to target overall. So just be careful when you are targeting them. I think the way I'm going to break it down today is we're going to kind of go position by position, talk about some of the guys who are options, some of the guys who you can spend up on, and also some of the value guys that you can put in there, because there are a lot of value guys today that I think we're going to be seeing on quite a few rosters with the way they've been playing lately. So starting at the point guard position, I don't think I'm going to be paying up for any of the studs tonight. I think the highest I'm willing to go is maybe Brandon Knight at 7,600. Remember, Eric Bledsoe got hurt and went out the last game, and Knight put up some pretty good numbers. He's going to have a much higher usage rate now that Eric Bledsoe's out, and I think that he's going to be able to pay off that price. I do like the matchup for him, and I don't think that 7,600 is too expensive. It's definitely not cheap. I like him a lot for cash. I don't know if I love him for tournaments. I don't think you're going to get that 50-point upside out of him that you're going to need. But we have seen him put up some huge games already this season. You know, he's had 60, 70 fantasy point games. And at 7,600, if you did something like that, that would be a huge return for you. I think you can also go cheaper, though, at this position. You got two guys that I'm looking at. JJ Barea has been unbelievable lately, taking over for Darren Williams. Looks like Williams is going to be out again tonight, so Barea at 5K is still too cheap in my opinion. He's put up like 40 fantasy points in the last two games, so even at 5K, you're still getting 7-8 times value out of him, and you know it's really tough to pass that up on a night, you know, where you're looking to find some value. And that's also why I don't think I'm going to be paying up for a guy like Steph Curry tonight, because I do like the value that you can find at the point guard position better than I like the value you can find in some of the other spots. The second guy I wanted to mention is Ish Smith. Ish was traded back to Philadelphia in a move that makes no sense to absolutely anybody, but they gave up a couple draft picks to bring him back in there, and it seems like they're plugging him right into the point guard spot. His first game was the other day. He played big minutes, put up a pretty solid score. Price is still below $5,000 here. I think he can get you 25 to 30 fantasy points, which would be 5.5 to 6x. And I think he's another viable option if you don't feel like spending up today, which is why I said point guard, probably a position I'm looking to save at. At the shooting guard spot, there are really only three guys who I'm kind of targeting here. The guy I would be willing to pay up for is Dwayne Wade at 6,800. I do like this matchup for him. They're getting paced up a little bit. I think he could be in a good spot here. I think he can get me the 40 fantasy points that I need. I think it's more of a tournament play than a cash play. I don't think it's that safe, but I do think that there's some upside there. So Wade is definitely one of the guys I'll be looking at. Another guy who I think is in a really good spot is Rodney Hood at 4,700. Here's the deal. You got Burks. Alec Burks is out. So you got to think that that's going to up Hood's minutes, up his usage, up his scoring, all the things we like to see. The drawback is Hood actually left the last game in the first half with what they call the glute injury. He came back in the fourth quarter and he basically had like 4 points heading into the fourth quarter, and then wound up putting up like 17 or 18 fantasy points in the fourth quarter, which is kind of what wraps everything up about Hood that we like and dislike here. We like the fact that he can put up points in a hurry. He's going to be seeing more time. He's going to be getting more minutes, going to be getting more usage without Burks in there. But at the same point in time, there is a little bit of an injury concern. So I think he's mostly a guy that I'm going to be looking at for tournaments, because there is the chance that he goes out there and does get injured again and does have to come out of the game. And if that happens, he's going to be a guy that you're only going to get like 4 or 5 fantasy points out of if, he gets hurt in the first quarter like he did last time. I had him the other night when he had the glute injury, and I was really thinking that he was going to kill a bunch of my rosters. He had that late fourth quarter flurry where he wound up getting himself up to like 20-something fantasy points and at least salvaging the day for us. And, like I said, that's the dichotomy of him. That's the upside and the downside all wrapped up in one. So he is risky. I'd probably stay away from him in cash, but I do think he's a great GPP play today. The other guy I'm looking at is JJ Redick, who's at 5,100. Now, I know Redick's not really all that sexy, but I think he's better for cash. Without Blake Griffin in there, they're looking for guys that can score the basketball. So I do think that there's a good chance that he can get you that, 25 to 30 fantasy points that you're really looking for. And I think that would make him one of the top plays. Moving on to the small forward spot, I have no problem paying up for LeBron James today. He's 9,800. I really like him in cash. I think he's going to give you that 50 fantasy point, floor that you're looking for, probably 45 to 55, somewhere in there. I don't expect huge upside on him. I don't see a 70-point game coming, but I do think he's a viable option for cash. Another guy who I like for cash and a little more for GPPs is Gordon Hayward. Hayward's at 7,200, really good matchup against Philly. Philly's a team that gives up a lot of fantasy points basically across the board to everybody. Again, with no Burks in there, you got to think that his usage and his shots and his minutes are going to tick up a little bit too. So I think Gordon Hayward is fine to pay up for. He's been giving you 35 to 45 fantasy points as well. I think 7K is a tad pricey, but not too overly expensive where I wouldn't be using him. Next guy I want to talk about, Chandler Parsons stands out to me as almost a must play. He's $5,200. The minutes restriction has been lifted, so he's playing over 30 minutes a game the last couple, and he's putting up over 30 fantasy points a game when he does so. I do like this Dallas team. I think you can stack guys like him and Barea together. I think they're going to give you a lot of points. I think it's a great thing to do in cash, and I also think that they both have the upside at those low prices where it's a viable tournament strategy as well. I mean, both of these guys have been giving you over 30 fantasy points, and they're both $5,000. So basically over 30 fantasy points is over 6x value. And over 6x value puts you on pace to score over 300, which could give you a nice cash in the tournament. So I do think that these Dallas guys are going to be in play. I expect to see high ownership on Barea, and I also expect to see high ownership on Parsons, although I think Barea will be a little bit higher than Parsons. So Parsons to me is the sneakier guy, but I'm going to have both of these in my lineups in cash and GPPs. Moving on to power forward, I think you can pay up for Boogie. He's $10,000 going up against Golden State. It's not an easy matchup. Golden State, even though they play fast and they have high scores in their games, are a very defensive, efficient team. I do think that Boogie has been putting up 50 points. They are on the tail end of a back-to-back. And if there's any chance that Sacramento is going to stay in this game, I think they're going to need a big game out of Boogie Cousins here. So I think there is some risk in it. It's probably more something I'd look to do in the tournament. But I do think that Boogie is a viable option to pay up for. I also like Draymond Green on the other side of the game. Going up against Sacramento, it's a fast-paced game. It's going to be up and down, and that's kind of Draymond Green's game. And the thing that people are sleeping on is, like, this guy is a walking triple-double threat. He's like 6th or 7th in the entire league in assists. Not on his team, not at the power forward position, in the entire league. So he's going to be getting the rebounds that he always gets. He's going to be scoring a couple points. He's actually ticked his scoring up. He's a guy that used to have to worry about getting the 10 points for his triple-double. Now it seems like he's more in like the 14 to 18-point range. So he's been comfortably getting the points, locked down and then adding the rebounds and the assists. And he also gives you the defensive stats. He gets a couple steals for you. He gets a couple block shots, and even if this game does turn into a blowout, we've seen him put up triple doubles in 3 quarters before. The only other guy that I know that does that is Russ Westbrook. So I think you have to respect Draymond. My biggest problem is the price. $9,300 is getting a little expensive for him. So I don't know if I love the fact that you can pay up for him. And you also have a lot of options that we're going to get to here in a second for some of the cheaper guys that you can use at the power forward spot. You got guys like Taj Gibson at $5,300. As long as Noah's out, Gibson's been playing more minutes, putting up 25 to 30 fantasy points. So I think he's a safe 5 to 6x for your cash games. Also think you can look at a guy like John Laura with the Phoenix Suns, their power forward. Now, Markieff Morris is suspended. We know that Eric Bledsoe's out. So that's going to mean a couple more minutes at the 2 for a guy like PJ Tucker, maybe a couple more minutes at the 3 for a guy like TJ Warren, which is only going to open up more minutes for Laura at the power forward spot, especially considering that he's getting 30 minutes a game right now and putting up 30 fantasy points anyway, because they don't have Markieff Morris in there who's still suspended. So I think that he's another guy that you can look at. The guy in that range that I actually like the most, though, is Nerlens Noel from the Philadelphia 76ers. They have the matchup against Utah. Gobert is still out. There's a good chance that Derek Favors might not play in this game either. He's highly questionable. So you're probably going to get guys like, who do they have left? I think Booker, maybe is it Trey Lyles? I'm not even sure who the other guy that'll be in there at the big man spot is. But as long as Jahlil Okafor is out, that Noel's going to be playing some power forward and some center. He's going to have an uptick in his rebounds. He's going to have an uptick in his minutes. He's not a guy that gives you a ton of points. He doesn't have a very polished offensive game. But he is very good on the defensive end. He does get you some steals. He does get you some blocks. And the more minutes that he's on the court, the more of those stats he's going to be able to rack up. So I'm looking for a double-double out of Noel today with maybe 3 or 4 blocks and assists added in, 3 or 4 blocks and steals added in there. And if you just use those points right there, it's going to get you up to like 30 to 35 fantasy points, which is 5 to 6x for him at a value of only 6K. So Nerlens Noel is another cheap option that I like if you decide that you don't want to spend up at the power forward spot today. Moving on to the center spot, Nikolai Vukovich is probably my favorite option. He's up at 7,400, has a really good matchup against New Orleans. New Orleans has been struggling against centers all season long, especially guys that are actually post players that can go down in the post, get the ball, and score. Vukovich has been playing a lot of minutes lately. The minutes restrictions he had when he first came back from injury have been lifted. He's putting up 35, 45 fantasy points, and at a price of 7,400, I think he's going to give you the value that you need here. Definitely like him a lot in cash. I think you can use him in GPPs as well. I don't know if he's going to be too highly owned. I think there's a lot of guys in that range that'll kind of spread it out. Another guy in that range, DeAndre Jordan. Again, no Blake Griffin going up against Washington. Washington's a high-paced team. I think that you can expect a few more rebounds, maybe even a little bit more scoring. You got to think that, everybody's going to have to pick up their scoring a little bit. I know Chris Paul and JJ Redick are the guys that like most to pick up their scoring. But I do think you get a few more minutes, a few more rebounds, and a few more points that come out of DeAndre Jordan too. So I think he's viable at 7,200, especially in a fast-paced game. The last guy I want to talk about is Al Horford. Horford's going up against Indiana. Now, Indiana's given up some huge games to fantasy centers. Most recently, Karl-Anthony Towns hung a 50 spot on them a couple days ago. But, I mean, this has been going on all season long where centers have been doing well against Indiana. Horford's really cheap at only 6,300. I do expect Atlanta to be winning this game. Vegas has this game with a sneaky high total, and the spread is not too big on it. So if they expect it to stay close and we get 30 to 35 minutes out of Horford in this one, I definitely think he can get us a fantasy point per minute and, come up somewhere in the 30 to 40 fantasy point range, which for 6,300 would be a really useful guy you can put into your roster. One last guy I want to mention. I know everybody's going to be talking about Karl-Anthony Towns based off the big games that he's had recently. He is seeing more minutes. He is playing well, and he does have a skill set where he can get you a double-double on almost any night. My problem is I don't usually target guys against San Antonio. I do think that Tim Duncan will be playing in this one. He rested in the last game because it was the tail end of a back-to-back, and they didn't really need him. The spread is pretty high in this one, so they're expecting San Antonio to blow it open. I do like Towns a little bit. His price at 69 is not too expensive. I just think this is a really tough matchup for him. And, for a couple $100 more, I think I'd rather roll with Vukovich or Horford, or for a couple hundred, Vukovich or DeAndre. And for a couple $100 less, I think I'd rather roll with Horford. So these are the guys who I think I'm going to be targeting instead on Friday night. But that gives you an overview of the guys who I like the best. I do think that you can build your roster around one of these centers, using LeBron James and then fitting in all the value that we talked about at the other positions. But there are some spots in some of these tournament rosters where I'm going to go a little bit away from that, because I do think you're going to get really high ownership on guys like Barea and Parsons today. And then even at the power forward position, I think people are still going to be loving Taj Gibson, and he's going to have high ownership, which is why I do like the Nerlens Noel play, because it's basically the same price, and you're going off of him to a guy who I think sees more minutes and gets more upside in a much less crowded front court there in Philadelphia. So those have been my thoughts for fantasy basketball here on Monday. Thank you guys for joining us over at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.